a unit that's wider than the timber you're planing. Because what you can do, you can actually skew the whole unit as you're passing it along the timber, much like somebody who's experienced with a hand plane would do. Basically what this does is it changes the effective cutting angle of the knives in the head and allows you to have another opportunity for getting through some difficult grain. So you might find that a particular patch of difficult grain is fuzzy if you go straight across, but it might actually get through a lot cleaner if you kind of skew it a little bit. The nice thing is that the extra width gives you the opportunity to do that. The other thing that's really nice about it is when your Tersa cutter head, you've got fresh knives in there and you have a nice clean timber, the finish from it is beautiful. If you slow down a little bit and you don't go too fast, you don't get any knife marks on it. And really the amount of sanding that you would have to do on the portion of the timber that you don't have lines drawn on or anything like that, or you haven't dropped your chisel on, the portion of the timber that has just been recently planed, you have minimal sanding to do. It really does leave a beautiful finish. You'll have to do a little bit to get rid of the knife marks because you put an oil on it. It will show up, but there's really not a lot of work to do after you've planed with this thing, especially with fresh knives. Now, this thing is, I can't remember the exact number, but it's between 45 and 50 pounds. I don't care how tough you are, if you've used this thing for an entire day in August, you're going to sleep well. So this little roller thing here is nice. It means when you're back at one end of the timber and you need to go back to the start again, you don't have to pick the thing up and carry it. You can roll it on. But here's a little trick, or a little tip. If you haven't swept the timber off and you've still got a few chips on it, this will actually cause a dent. Now, it's not necessarily the end of the world if you're doing another pass, but it is a good idea anyway to sweep the timbers off after every pass, because there's no real deliberate conscious component of this thing that moves the chips away on your next pass, and it is possible to inadvertently get up underneath some, and then you end up with the unit running along on the uneven path. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. This foot that we talked about, this little automatic flip down foot, now it is fantastic, but it is not idiot proof. If you set this thing down on an uneven surface, you can kind of get a sense by looking at it how much leeway that this gives you. It isn't very much. Absolutely fine on a flat surface. But if you put it down on an uneven surface, you still can hit that cutter head. And if it's coasting down, it's basically still running, and you hit an immovable object with it fairly hard, not only can you ruin the knives, but you can actually damage the cutter head, which would be a bad thing. The other thing is you cannot skimp on this. You absolutely need to have clean timbers. Some folks may think it's excessive, but I have gotten into the habit now of brushing down and sweeping every single timber unless I'm absolutely positive it's just come off the sawmill and I'm the only one who's handled it. Because even though the knife swap is fast, you don't want to do it, and you especially don't want to do it when you've just replaced them, because you know they're in the range of $80 to $110 each, depending on your source, and it adds up to a lot of money. So I sweep and brush off every single timber before I plane it. I'll use something like this. I actually have a larger one. This is made for a broom. That's where you normally would thread your broom handle in there. It's very coarse, and it's fairly effective for digging grit out of the timber. So I sweep it all down with that coarse one, and then I use a finer brush on every surface, on every timber, unless I know what it is. And it makes a huge difference. If I'm really good about it and don't miss anything, it's entirely possible to do an entire job on one set of knives. In pine or a lot of other softwoods, it would be a different case if you were doing oak, for example. The other thing is this base, you probably already noticed this. This base is only aluminum. This thing would be monstrously heavy if not. And it scratches really easy. So if you do find a little piece of grit and you run across it, you've probably nicked your knives, but you've probably also scratched up the bottom. You can see there are some scratches on mine. So the scratches on their own don't necessarily hurt anything, but typically what happens along your scratch, there's a little bit of a burr of aluminum, and it ends up being